Koppel, host of the Time for Coffee podcast, where you get firsthand career advice into the jobs and industries that interest you the most. And before we start today's show, I have a quick favor to ask you. If you haven't already, I'd be incredibly grateful if you give us a rating and a review on iTunes. And if you're like me, you need to do it now because you'll forget later and because it's the best way to help others who may be in search of career advice to find this free resource. So press pause if you haven't done it and do it right now. I'll wait. Thanks so much and enjoy today's show. Hey there, Java Junkies. Welcome to another K-Cup mini episode of Time for Coffee. By the way, K-Cups come in 3 sizes, single, double, and triple shots, or roughly 1 minute, 5 minutes, or 10 minutes in length. So if you don't have time to throw back an entire caffeinated career conversation, these K-Cup mini episodes of T4C can give you a quick caffeinated fix, whether you're on the go or you only have a few minutes to binge. So grab your mug and take a chug, because it's time for a caffeinated career triple shot K-Cup with my guest, AJ Eckstein. You may have already hit on this, and if you have, it's fine. But I try to ask all my guests if they would share a time in their professional life, and maybe this goes back to your interning, when they struggled, and maybe they even failed. And it's less about the failure and more about how they persevered, and if there was a lesson that they learned in the process. And it's totally fine if you want to say, hey, it was when I applied to the consulting club and the other club or an internship, or maybe even since you've been at Accenture.
Well, I love this topic because I think, again, we talk a lot about success and the wins, and more people need to ask questions about how did you struggle? How did you maybe not have the best mental health? How did you potentially fail? I would say, and I'll go back to my time interning at the Walt Disney Company on the Business Leader Rotation Program. And I remember that I was so excited because I got my first rotation was on the finance team. But then I said, wait a second, I only have a couple of finance classes under my belt, and this is going to be an absolute grind. And I really didn't want to start my day one struggling. And I was actually really afraid because I had major imposter syndrome. And I said, wait a second, I see people who are finance majors who are going into investment banking, who prepared entire summers for these types of internships. I was very fortunate to get on the program, but I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to succeed. And I really wanted to be an asset to the team, to the company. So I think the best way that I was able to break this imposter syndrome and to not struggle from day one is to do the additional work needed to hit the ground running. And it wasn't required, but I took an additional online course prior to starting my internship on finance. And yes, it costs a little bit of money. And yes, I had to spend some weekends and sacrifice some nights out to finish this course. But I came in with some additional value that I could provide. I didn't want to come in saying that I'm going to be one of the hardest interns and that you're going to have to hold my hand the entire time. Of course, I still had to learn a ton, and it was a very steep learning curve. But I think that whenever you have imposter syndrome, how could you ask yourself, how could I break this? How could you ask yourself how I can get more knowledgeable on a subject? How could you use literally Google? YouTube is one of my best friends, and learn more about it. So I was really afraid of struggling, and I was really worried that I got this internship and I'm like, this is not for me. But then I ended up really providing a lot more value because I came in doing more than the next person. I think that's also a theme that I live by, is that, and a great quote is, the difference between ordinary and extraordinary is just that little extra. So I always, whatever I do, always trying to provide a little more extra, whatever it is, whether it's in my consulting job, at the final round, in my sports. I recently completed an Olympic triathlon. How could I do a little bit more than the next person? And that's a huge takeaway that I'd love for the Time for Coffee audience takeaway.
Don't know what to say to that other than, holy shit, you are just such an incredible mentor for our listeners, really and truly. And P.S., That's what I have done my whole career as well, AJ. Weekends, weeknights, reading, cramming, doing that extra to come up to speed. That's what it takes. That's really what it takes. Final question. If you could go back to USC and do it all over again, but based on the wisdom you have right now, what advice would you give yourself?
Well, I was prepared for this question because I know you asked this question to, I think, many, if not all of your guests, the final question. And again, just going back and showing to people that I do my research. And again, I don't just preach, but I practice what I preach. But I would say if I were to go back, and this is not even just at USC, but I would say in my life, even in high school, is I think a lot of people, and I was a culprit of this, in that you don't want to be labeled a try hard because it's not cool or sexy to be the first in a lot of things, especially early on. Obviously, as I'm sure you realize, once you're in your career, you want to be first. You want to be the biggest, the best, have the most leadership, have the most responsibility, get paid the most, whatever it is. But I think early on, there's a stigma to being first, whether that is being the first to walk into a classroom, whether that is sitting in the front row, whether that is participating in class, whether that is going to office hours. And I'll even go even farther back. When I was in middle school, I was a very fast runner. I literally ran 6 miles yesterday. I love to run and clear my head. And I didn't want to be first because I didn't want to be first. I didn't want to be laughed at because there is a stigma to being a quote unquote try hard. But I would say looking back, those people are just so narrow-minded because if you don't go out and get what you want, someone else will take it. That's the first thing. And the second thing, it's across the board, whatever you do. And there's another quote, again, I love quotes, especially from movies, from a movie called Lone Survivor. And one of my favorite quotes that I live by, that I literally have taped on the side of my home office here, my bedroom, not so much an office, but more so office/bedroom, is that anything in life worth doing is worth overdoing. Because if you give 50% to something, you're going to fail. And someone else is going to give 60%, 80%. So again, to go full circle and answer your question, don't be afraid to be in the spotlight. Don't be afraid to shoot for the president role or the VP role, even if your friends are going to laugh at you for wearing a suit and tie and going to a networking event on a Tuesday. And I think a lot of that comes from them not being vulnerable with themselves and not really understanding that while you're taking control of your life and you're actually doing something with yourself. So again, don't be afraid to be labeled a try hard. Go out and do it, because what I've learned is the same people who laugh and say, oh, there's the LinkedIn guy and he posts all this stuff and oh, he posted this and that, are the same people a year or two later that are asking for advice, that are saying, hey, can you help me get a job? That are saying, hey, let's be friends now. And you're saying, wait a second, you treated me horribly, or you were not the nicest person. Why would I want to help you now? That's how it works. So again, biggest thing is go out. If you want to do something, you want to get something, go out and take it, go out and give it your all, because if not, someone else will take it from you.
AJ is the host of the Final Round podcast. He's also a LinkedIn learning instructor, and he's someone who posts fantastic insights and advice pretty much every day on LinkedIn. So you're definitely going to want to give him a follow and subscribe to the Final Round. AJ, where else can our listeners find you?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for the plug there. Yes, I'd love for people to follow and reach out. Say that you are from the T4C community, that you heard us on the show. Maybe shout out your favorite quote from this episode, or maybe from one of the episodes of the Final Round. But LinkedIn is an amazing place to follow, to connect, to reach out. I probably check that more than I do a lot of other channels. Another great place is just going to thefinalround.com. You'll be able to see our podcast, all of our other initiatives, and that's a great place to learn more about us. But I would say those two are the main areas, LinkedIn and our website.
AJ, I want to thank you so much for making time for coffee today, for that black coffee with me and the T4C community. You are incredible, and this was fantastic.
All the pleasure was mine. And again, going full circle, I've been a community member in the Time for Coffee community for some time now, and I've listened to tons of episodes, and now to be on the other side of it, you never know what could happen by putting yourself out there. And again, for anyone listening, put yourself out there, and you never know who will reach out, maybe have you as a guest on their show, podcast, whatever it may be.
Thanks for tuning in to this K-Cup mini episode of Time for Coffee. If you want to listen to our entire caffeinated career conversation, please check out the show notes for this episode. Thanks so much for listening to this latest episode of T4C. And if you're interested in learning more about my coaching services for confused college students and recent grads, feel free to check out the Time for Coffee website under the coaching tab at time4coffee.org or text me at 202-236-5712. That's 202-236-5712.